since I got into sales and been in real estate, I've really made it a point of you have to have a checklist of I need to get all this stuff done. And even the worst day where you get MRF'd on the phone or whatever.
I think I am going to try really, really, really hard, especially with buyers, to pull them out of the gap and put them in the gain by kind of using this chapter, right? Talking about if you buy today. We are reading The Gap and the Gain, and I don't know if you guys read the intro and chapter 1, or if you just read chapter 1.
I read the intro and I'm almost through chapter 1.
I started with the intro and I thought, like, I can't tell you how many times I looked at my phone. I'm like, did I open a book or a podcast? Because at first I thought it was a podcast, but then I just realized that the dialogue was kind of going back and forth. But it was a very interesting setup, and I actually liked the intro.
Right. I did too.
Yeah, I did too, because I think it gave a very clear vision of what the gap and the gain was without giving away too many of the details that he kind of starts going into in each of the chapters. So I wrote down, being in the gap makes you a bully, wanting people to be where you want them to be. So that was kind of his intro into the gap and the gain. That's kind of what I took away after listening to that. So what is your takeaway from there? What do you guys kind of think about the intro, and what do you think about where the book's headed and how it might help you guys?
The idea of it is something like you've always had, like I've always had that in my back of my mind, that like it's always like it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. You know what I mean? Like, especially in real estate. I mean, are we ever going to get there, wherever the magical there is? We're never going to get there. We're always going to be, like, me personally, I'm always like, I look back on last year and I'm like, man, I'm so pissed off because there's so many things that I didn't do. And my wife has to pull me aside and say, you know, you moron, you did this, this, and this. Like, you never were doing that like 2 years ago. I was like, all right, that's a good point. Like, but that never had a name. And I think it's really cool that he has like a name and an explanation for it. You know, I think that that's cool. I think that, and it makes sense. I think we all deal with that, you know?
Absolutely. So the first quote, the one that you just kind of opened up with, I'm not going to lie, the first time I was reading it, I think I wasn't really ready to hear it yet. And so I started listening more and more and started really understanding. And so now hearing it again, I'm like, wow, it's like the visualization of kind of that. It's almost like just a shift in doing things, a shift in heart set, a shift in soul set, however you want to look at it. It's like, okay, well, you've got the gap and you've got the gain. You're sitting over here at the gap. You're the bully because you're pulling everybody else back into the gap because you're almost unaware that the gap is kind of causing those problems. You know, it's like, just switch over to the game, like be, gratitude.
Right.
So it's almost like the way it was presented. Like that first quote, I think I missed it the first time because I wasn't ready to hear it, but now hearing it again, it means something completely different.
Right. Well, to me, it goes back to my favorite quote, right? Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. Get out of the gap and get into the gain. And all of a sudden, you're having a different perspective on things. I don't know if you guys use this in sales, but Steve, when I read this, I went, holy shit. That's how you get your clients across the finish line. Like, that's the definition of getting these people across the finish line. It was like, oh, I understand what I'm doing now, and I actually understand the purpose. Now I know what the win is and what the lose is, and I know how to get to the win. It was like with these buyers right now. I don't know about your first-time home buyers. They don't want to buy, right? They don't want that house.
And I've got a seller, like, over the weekend, we were doing this. We were back and forth because she didn't want to give away anything. Like, anything. I'm like, Mary, God bless you. I love you to death. We got to give something. You have a 30-something-year-old house. And I finally had to go to play the card of, look, you want to get to the lake. You want to be done, don't you? Like, this is it. We've been trying to do this for months. This is the off-ramp, baby. I think all sales is about pain. It's all pain relief. And we have to remind our people of the pain that we're relieving. I don't know if that's quite the gap in the gain thing, but there is a gain, by doing things. And we have to keep that front and center with them.
Yeah, that was such a cool realization. I was like, oh, that's the secret to sales.
Yep.
Right there. You want to know the secret to sales? It's right there. Watch our book club, read this book. If you can put the two and connect the dots, you will definitely put that together and be amazing at sales. So anyway, so as he kind of continues, that was kind of, in my opinion, that was kind of the overview of the intro. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think the first chapter was kind of cool. So in the first chapter, he talks about the gap being the negative space and the gain being the positive space. And the first emotion that he drives that to is happiness, right? That being being in the game is actually where you're happy. When you're the swimmer and you say, oh, who cares if I don't win? I'm just happy to swim. All of a sudden you break records and win your Olympic gold, as opposed to being in the game, in the gap, where you're like, oh, I have to win. I want to win. That's the only answer. That's the only thing that'll make me happy. And you're consistently chasing what you think is happy. What did that realization do to you guys? Or how does that apply to your life? Or how did that kind of play an effect on you as you were reading through that part of the emotion part of the definition of that?
I'm going to take a stab at it. So basically, I think during that point, he was also kind of making a lot of relations to like sports. And so he kind of talked about like being in the zone. I did do sports. I wasn't really that big into sports. I was more into music. It the exact same zone. It's funny because as a kid, I never really knew what put me in the zone and what didn't put me in the zone. And generally, I wasn't in the zone because I was so critical of myself. So like, especially with practicing, you can't get in the zone practicing because you're just sitting there criticizing yourself. But, then he kind of talked about, that example of swimmer, they kind of go from, oh, no, it wasn't a swimmer. I forgot.
I don't remember. He was an athlete.
He said something and he had to like clarify himself on Twitter. And he was saying, I'm not saying I don't take this seriously. What I'm saying is I see it differently from you guys. When you're in the zone, you're not really critical because it's just like, it's very similar to meditation where you get to that, like, the now, and you're kind of focused on like, really just observing thoughts and kind of moving them aside so you can focus. It's almost like he's explaining that. Then like kind of explaining the gap in the game. It was just something about how he explained that and me relating it to like when I was doing music. The only time I was ever in the moment is when I was like focused on, oh man, this is a really fun song to play. Or, oh, I just want to play this because I want them to hear it, as opposed to, oh, I got to play it for a bunch of fun in front of a bunch of folks. I gotta not miss the third line. I gotta make sure I do this note right. I'm not in the zone at that point because I'm in the gap, and you can't get in the zone in the gap. And you do your best work in the zone. But you got to be in the game to be in the zone.
Right. As realtors, for us, the hardest thing for us is obviously the big payday for us is payday. It's going to closing. Nothing we did on closing day led to a closing. Like everything that we did 3 months prior led to the closing. And sometimes it's like you have a day where it sucks. It sucks ass. Okay. It's awful. But the reality is you probably had a phone call in there that planted a seed. You probably had something anytime since I got into sales and been in real estate, I've really made it a point of you have to have a checklist of I need to get all this stuff done. And even the worst day where you get MRF'd on the phone or whatever, you still check the boxes, make the phone calls, whatever, because that's all you can do. I can't control decisions people make. I can't control anything. All I can control is what we do. I think that helps you stay out of the gap and just say, look, I can't worry about you can have a day where you go to closing, you have a crap day because you make any phone calls. Because you spent 8 hours being excited because you got a big check in your hand. Like that was a terrible day. In retrospect, because you didn't do anything. And sometimes the worst days can be the best days. So it's like you have to just keep that in mind that all you can do is you have to just keep plowing forward, and keep building for tomorrow.
Right. For me, I think it was a permission of being given the ability to just be happy, right? Like I think a lot of us kind of look for happiness and things we achieve, to your point, Steve. What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing tomorrow? Where's our checklist? But to me, it was just here's permission to just be happy. Just put a smile on your face and be happy in the shoes and the body you're in right now. And a good definition of that for me, just because I think a lot of times it's like you lay down at night and you're like, am I happy? Am I not happy? What makes me happy? What am I chasing? Why am I chasing it? Why am I doing it? Because we all work hard. Not anybody on this call is sitting down watching TV for 4 or 5 hours a day, or, jet setting off in a plane right now and enjoying 4 weeks off. Like we all work our asses off.
Nice.
Hey, we'll be there. Listen, one day we're taking over. Baby. We're taking over the world one house at a time. I promise y'all. So we will be jet setting one day, but we're not there yet. Mm-hmm. And I think for people in our shoes, it does feel like a rat race, and it does feel like you're always chasing that happy. And it was just a nice, hey, just be happy, because catching that's not going to get it. Right.
Because again, like I said earlier, it's like that always changes. Like when your first year in real estate, what were your goals? They're not the goals you have now. You know what I mean?
I wanted to sell a house and survive.
Right.
I wanted to make more than I was making. I was only making $19,000. It didn't have a big reach. That, yes.
So, funny comment I just thought of, like when you were talking about watching TV for 4 hours. So I'm in the middle of a tax CPE and it's 3.5 hours. And that was the first thing I thought of. I was like, this is actually the most, like the least like intensive thing I've done all week. I feel like I'm watching TV for 4 hours.
And you just be happy.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I'm enjoying it as much as I can.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So to your point, kind of brings me to the next emotion he brings us. Today, we are going to be discussing chapters 2 and 3 in The Gap and the Gain. And I'm loving the book. I hope you guys are enjoying it as much
Love
as
it, love it, love it. Love this book.
I actually really do. I really do.
All right, right into it. So in chapter 2, they talk about being self-determined, and they talk a lot about living in the gap and comparing yourself and to your own achievements rather than consistently trying to always play catch up or comparing yourself to where others kind of are. They talk a lot about external reference points that make it impossible to fuel because no matter what you have done, the success criteria is always moving, right? So how does that kind of correlate to you guys' lives? How are you going to implement these type of thoughts and strategies into your life? And as you were reading that, what kind of came to fruition in your brains?
So the first two things that I think of is like a differentiation strategy. And then I also think about like the definition of being unique. If you're going to embrace your own uniqueness, you can't compare yourself to anyone else because there's no one else like you. That's kind of what I thought about. And it's just like the more you embrace it, it's like you think about it from a business standpoint, a differentiation strategy. Well, the reason you do a differentiation strategy is so you can charge more because you're adding value in different areas. It's almost like them saying, guys, it's like put it together, you get it now, you know? So
for me, it was kind of like we talked about a little bit last week. I kind of jumped the gun, I guess, a little bit about like you've got to put your checklist together of like what do I need to do every day versus like you can't measure by like for us in real estate. I mean, I may have had the best day ever today because I talked to 40 people. I got nothing to show for it. I got a lot of MRFers. I had a couple of people sign up or whatever, but you know, the one person's going to end up being $1 million buyer. One's going to end up giving me $1 million listing, you know? So it's like, you don't know. Today could be, to me, I think it's like, you can't, because those like you said, those goalposts are going to be moving. You have to really be careful of what we measure. We can only measure what we can control, you know?
Well, right. And I think you just kind of hit it on the nail on the head, right? You can only measure what you can control. Right. I can't control how many phone calls you make tomorrow. I have zero control in that. And the amount of phone calls you make may equate to more business in your business than my business, but I can't control that, right? Like I right. absolutely can't control it. For me, it was another measuring tape. Right? Like it was another definition of a successful piece of measurement. How am I today going to do better than I did yesterday? And I think, you know, I coach a lot of agents. I've got a new agent who's brand new. She's about to come on to EXP. I met with her today. She may even join our book club, which I'm really excited about. You know, and the first thing I told her, and the first thing I tell a lot of the agents that I coach is you can't measure where you are today compared to where I am today. I am 8 years ahead of you, and I've had 43 years of different experiences than what you've had. And so I think that's a part of this that I kind of always knew, but I don't think I ever looked backwards at measuring my success today from my success yesterday. And I think for me, that's where a lot of the change and a lot of the magic kind of happened in that chapter was like, oh, I get it. Tomorrow, if I walked a mile yesterday, I need to walk a mile in a 10th today.
Right.
It is 100% against me and kind of what I did. How do you think this shift in thinking will change your business? What do you think that will do for you in business and in life, period, as you start measuring your own self against your own gains as opposed to living in the gap where you're measuring yourself against others?
I never really understood why I liked planning so much, but when I kind of think through this, so I've always thought, so as a kid, I always liked I recorded music, right? And the reason I recorded music was because I actually did it for, practice. You would practice a couple of times, you'd record it, and then, you would do it again like 6 months later. And so I used to like kind of looking back at that and kind of seeing the progression, like, just evolve over time. And so when I plan, it's always through like a vision board or like a Word document or whatever. And so that's something you can you can look at a plan that you made back in high school, like, oh, I'm going to be an astronaut and I'm going to do this and yada, yada, yada. And so you can look at it again like 10 years later, and you can see like where you just blew stuff out of the water, or you can see like, oh, okay, I clearly wasn't interested in that. And so that's always been like a fun activity for me. And I think this like book is kind of explaining like why almost.
Well, if we could hear you, that would be amazing.
Sorry, I had to mute you because there was all kinds of the diva. I guess it was kind of a rough going on in the other podcast, so she was screaming and everything. So when I left a team before going solo, I was on a team for 3 years. And I spent a lot of time figuring out, all right, where am I versus where this team is? Like, how can I keep up? How can I this and that? And it's like, I can't keep up. Like, that dude was in business for years before I was. He's got a massive team. I'm all by myself as well. Like, I can't measure up. Like, and it took me a while to kind of get to that point where it's like, it's okay. I just have to look and see what I did last year and how can I improve it? How can I improve this month versus last month? How can I all that? So again, like we talked about last week, this is all stuff that you kind of know, but it never had a name.
Right.
But now that it has like a name and it has kind of like a framework, like it's like, okay, that's why this makes sense. That's why this is cool.
Right. Yeah. No, I love these books because it gives everything we've already known all this stuff we're reading, but I so love every once in a while you just find one where you get a huge definition. So for me, and where I think I'm going to implement this the most in my business is with my clients. I think I am going to try really, really, really hard, especially with buyers, to pull them out of the gap and put them in the gain by kind of using this chapter, right? Talking about if you buy today, where are you going to be in 5 years? Right? As opposed to living in the gap. I have so many buyers right now stomping their feet, pounding their fists. Like, why didn't I buy a year ago? Why didn't I buy 5 years ago? Why didn't I buy 2 years ago? I can't afford what I want now because it's jumped up, 40%. And that's a crazy jump up. And so for me, it was a huge eye opener. Like, oh, let's start talking to our clients as if they bought the house. Like, let's use a little bit of that pain by not buying 4 years ago. Cause I have like 4 or 5 buyers right now who are just hating life because they couldn't really afford 4 years ago and they really can't afford today. But I think they all are trying to kind of be in the game where they see, okay, I need a buy, or I'm not going to ever be able to buy a house if I don't buy soon, at least not here in Atlanta, because prices are just getting to that point. And so for me, I think I want to use this part of the book and help them self-determine what's the best option for them and let them kind of realize on their own with some guidance on my part that if we put their thinking in the game and they understand that buying a house today may not be the most beautiful house. It may not be the house of their dreams, but if we foreshadow a little bit and show them what they'll have in 5 years, I think that will help move things down the pipeline a little faster for those clients. And then same thing with sellers. I've got sellers who are just kind of heels in the ground. Oh, do I want? Do I not want? I think that in my conversations and my scripts, my goal is to bring out this self-determined gain for all of my clients. I think that will help their motivation go up and help them move.
Right.
Like, that was my biggest takeaway from this chapter.
Yeah, because the buyers get like stuck in the mud and they can't see through the forest. And it's like for us in real estate, like it's a little busy right now. Like, there's multiple offers, there's that. But like, what if you didn't buy right now? What if you waited a year? Like in 1 year, prices are going to be higher. The rates are going to be lower, which means you're going to have a boatload of buyers out there. You're still going to have low inventory. So you're going to have more expensive houses and multiple offers with more people and more fun. Or you could get the house you want now.
Correct.
Cheaper, less headache. And then you refi next year.
Correct. And then be the seller in a year or two.
Right.
Getting the win because our market's going nowhere. This was a good chapter for sales for me.
Yep. Right.
Get those people out of the gap and have them self-determine what the best way to go is. So loved that. Kind of go ahead and move to chapter 3. So the compound effects of seeing the gains. What a fun chapter. Did you guys come up with any sayings for this one? Any if this, then that? After I will sayings. How did this chapter kind of come to fruition for you guys? It was, I guess, a little bit of a quick recap on it. Awesome. All right. So we are going over Gap and the Gain, and we are doing chapters 4, 5, and 6, which will conclude the book. Who loved the last 3 chapters?
I love
I did.
chapter 5. I'll text you that. Love chapter 5. Listen to it 3 times.
I know. I was just re-listening to it myself. I am like, literally, I think this might be my favorite book we've read so far. And he mentioned like 3 other books in the last couple chapters that I've jotted down. So those will probably be my next picks, to be honest. It was awesome. All right. Well, chapter 4, always measure backwards, increase your hope and resilience. So do you guys do this? Do you ever look backwards? In this chapter, he talks a lot about, I don't know if it was this chapter or the next one, but I know he starts talking a lot about journaling, and he kind of takes us through, and I think this is actually the second book that takes us through the 4 stages of understanding a new skill. I can't remember what the first book was, and I don't know if he uses the first words, but he talks about unconscious ignorance evolving into conscious competence and kind of takes you through the 4 steps there. He encourages you to keep a journal, kind of talks a little bit about how is a huge shift in raising your kids, right? So he kind of goes into a little bit in chapter 4 about what it talks about living in the gain and how that really affects the people under your roof, mainly the children under your roof. So let's kind of jump right in. Let's talk about a little bit about what it looks like to be in the gain, looking in your past and actually measuring those things, a little bit about what burnout looks like. So have you guys ever been in a situation where you're really living in the gap instead of the gain, and you're like 100% in burnout mode and you're like, I'm done?
Surprisingly enough, so I've actually worked with enough like counselors over the years, and so a habit that they wanted me to have is like essentially if I get into the gap, it's nice to have a name for it now. If I get into the gap at all, my habit is to actually like I'll pull out I have like a journal app on my phone that I've had for like the past 7 years. I guess that's been a nice habit over the years, and honestly, I think there was a couple of things in here that I want to update one of mine coming up, but I'll talk about that in a minute. I might be jumping ahead.
For me, and I may have said this last week, but like with my business, like as we're growing and things are happening, it's not happening at the speed that I want it to. Like I'm like pissed off because why am I not this? Why am I not that? And my wife has to pull me aside and say, this is where you were a year ago. Like, and look at how far we've come. Like last year was a perfect example. I think all of us got our butts kicked in real estate last year, especially the second half. Right. And nobody hit their numbers. Nobody. And it really pissed me off and whatever. And my wife's like, look at what you did last year, though. You know what I mean? It's like, and so, we have to live in that game. But for me, I'm thankful that I have somebody who's going to hold me accountable to that. You know what I mean? And say, stop, butthead, look backwards and look at where you were and where you are now.
I love that your wife calls you a butthead.
Yeah.
Well, and that's pretty impressive, Steve. She didn't even read the book. So for her too.
Right. Well, I mean, I have
that.
to do that with her too. I mean, she's stuck with the kids a lot, so I got to pull her off the ledge.
Awesome. Natalie, any comments on what burnout equates as far as in your life and kind of how this may transpire into a better situation moving forward with evaluating how you're doing in business and that kind of stuff? We kind of talked a little bit about this coaching yesterday.
Yes, of like hitting that restart button constantly of, oh my gosh, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And why do I feel like I'm starting over each day or each week? And so I definitely, for me, reading this book, I kind of started it a week ago. And so I've read all the chapters within the week. So they all kind of merged together. And what I really found was, the beginning chapters were reflecting more where I was in my past, where there was some darker days of trying to survive. And those chapters would have been really good for me back then. And as the book progressed, I found that each chapter kind of got to a new level that, hey, okay, maybe you don't have to be level 0 right now, depressed and dying. But as it progressed, I found that I was, relating more to the book. And in this chapter, I definitely felt it was great guidance for being a parent. And that was a good analogy that I could relate to. How do I treat my child? But then how do I treat my spouse? And then also my colleagues and buyers and sellers out there and helping them in their journeys. And I loved reading the book because it allowed me to reflect. A lot of times you kind of start to think about other things in your life and you get distracted from the book, but the book constantly made me think about how I can relate my life to the book.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. For me, this part of the book, I mean, it was right there in the beginning. It was another definition, right? Like, why am I so frustrated? I mean, I'm trying to do three major things right now. I'm trying to grow production, build a team, trying to learn how to flip houses, and trying to recruit agents. And I think when I read this, I had to stop because I think I hit that wall a little bit last week. I was like, Jesus Christ, I feel like I take 4 steps forward and then 7 steps backwards and then 3 steps forward. And I think remembering to look at the gain and looking backwards, he gave it an acronym, always look at, what was it? But I really liked the whole, like, always look backwards, right? Consistently look backwards. Because when you focus on your problems, it creates that burnout. And so, Steve, you kind of touched on my next topic, accountability partners. So as I was reading this, I actually wrote down accountability partner at the top of my page. And then a few sentences later, he goes in and says, record your gains. So accountability partners, let's talk about those a little bit and what that looks like in your life. Steve, it sounds like you use your wife as your accountability partner. Do you actually have a system to have an accountability partner? And if yes, what does that system look like? And if no, how is that going to change your life? And is that something you're willing to implement?
I need an accountability partner. I know I need an accountability partner. They should probably, in theory, should be somebody who's more in real estate. Just so that way, because, they'll hold me accountable to I can BS my wife because my wife doesn't know everything about, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the inner workings of the real estate world or whatever. But a real estate person's like, knows you're full of crap on certain things.
Well, you can get in the gap if she doesn't know the ins and outs and maybe not realize you're in the gap. So I think that's a good point.
Right. So, I mean, chapter 5, and not to jump ahead, but when he talks about doing the journaling and doing the 3 wins and whatever and using that. So that's my goal, is to find an accountability partner that I can do that with. Okay. Send the 3 and then, and do that every day. But we can make up all kinds of stories in our brains. We can all make up our own. So having accountability partners, like, you have to have one that will just say, call you out on your BS. Need to have one.
I totally agree. I just thought it was crazy. I was like, I need an accountability partner. Record your gains and get an accountability partner.
The 2 terms, they said somebody you trust and respect. And so it's interesting how you kind of quickly think through your mind of people that you might know and trust, but do you respect their opinions, or vice versa, you respect their opinions, but do you know and trust them? And so to try to filter your mind and your people of who would qualify for a good accountability partner. And then you got to make them read this book.
So I have 2 unofficial accountability partners, my fiance being one and then Laura being the other. So I'll say unofficial because I think we've kind of taken a break from it for a little bit, but it's been like, I don't know, Laura, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of miss it.
I do too. As I was reading the chapters, I was thinking about it a good bit, and I thought to myself, okay, how do we make this? And, you start talking about the accountability partner in the book before he makes you go back. I think it's 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, 6 months, and 3 months or something. I can't remember what the shorter time frames were. But I was thinking to myself a little bit about what Steve was saying, like, okay, Craig is awesome. And he's literally my biggest cheerleader in the whole world, but is sharing these goals. Like, do you separate it, right? Do I have like the 4 of us maybe every night, but I had a problem with that. Text your accountability partner every night. Get off your phone 30 minutes early and 30 minutes before you go to bed. I was like, what the fuck? How do I do? So I was struggling a little bit there. I thought, okay, maybe we could come up with maybe the group does one, we could share our 3 and 3 on the group text. I also thought, well, is it always going to only be real estate that we focus on, right? So bringing your spouse in may be something that you want to do, but I think that, like, for me, I'm willing to try it out on the group, at least with the 3 and 3, right? What are your 3 positives for the day? What are your 3 goals for tomorrow? And then I thought about kind of maybe looking at Craig for the rest of it as far as life goes. So I would encourage you guys to kind of look at that. Now, as we start, always measure backwards, A and B. I told you I wrote that damn thing down in this one, but they're kind of taking us into, as he's starting to get you guys to look backwards. Did anybody do that activity for one of the time frames, for all of the time frames? Did you guys do any or all of that activity?
20 to 23, I got engaged, started a YouTube channel, flipped 3 houses, bought a house with my fiance, hired a bunch of assistants, and started a couple of businesses.
Right. That's very, very, very amazing. So what do you think internally your day would end like if we all sat down and actually did this today? Like, what do you think the end of your day would look like? And how would that prep you for tomorrow?
I was just going to say, I mean, like he says in the book, you end the day with wins, focus tomorrow on wins, end the day with wins, focus tomorrow on wins. Like, at the end of the day, you have 3 wins. At the end of the week, you have 21 wins. And it's always about wins, 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 wins. I mean, it's going to keep you pointed in the right direction, and that's the thing. I mean, and so the last couple of nights I've really been focused on, I have an alarm on my phone, 9:45, phone's done. So I set the alarm, whatever, 9:45, and the phone's done. It's hard because I hear bzz, 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 you know what I mean? So I'll look on my watch to see. But it's not LED, so take that. But I've been journaling. I've been doing like a little crossword puzzle thing or whatever. So it's like just trying to get like my mind mellow. But last couple of nights, because like on my Fitbit, you can see when you get the REM sleep or whatever. And like my REM sleep's been better the last couple of nights since doing that.
So you're seeing it. Is this an activity you think you'll go back and do, Steve?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, one of the things he talked about in chapter 5, like that activity about the 3 games every night. So it actually reminds me of another one that I used to do. And I did it. I stopped doing it because it was too much. And I think he kind of talked about it in the book. Like the guy was saying, you know, I used to have all these very complex night routines. And one of the ones I had worked really well, but it was also complex. It was like you had to think of 10 people you would forgive, 10 things or 10 games. So basically the exact same thing, but 10. And then 10 things that you loved about yourself. To kind of get yourself into the mindset of, you know, kind of getting out of the gap and just staying in the game as a habit. Doing 10 every night was kind of hard. And after doing it for like 30 days, you can't think of people after 5. Like, well, who else do I have here? You know, this, like the simplification of it kind of makes it that much. It kind of gives me permission to kind of pull it back and kind of scale it to myself. And it could just be something like, you know, 3 of each every night. And so I think what it does is it kind of puts you in that habit. So then, like he says, when a COVID comes around or, you know, a shitting closing comes or just whenever something happens, it's like, okay, well, I won't get lost in the gap because you're so in the habit of staying in the game. It kind of makes you move differently every day.
Natalie, anything to add?
Well, I thought it was interesting how he said, you know, it's okay to go into the gap too. And that even the author of the book that's professional at this, he goes in there, you know, several times a day and just it's a good awareness though of knowing where you're at. And, you know, if you're kind of just floating through life or whatever, you know, it's hard to really assess that, but I love that applying your goals and knowing what your goals are and reviewing them each day, you can actually know, okay, when are you making progress on them versus you're just, you know, living. And so